Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. "2004, in the heart of Shasta Trinity National Forest. I was called out for a search operation, which wasn't unusual. People get lost in the wilderness all the time. And I liked my job. I really did. Not just the being in the woods part, though that was a huge bonus. I liked the feeling of finding someone, of making sure they got home safe. I'd joke sometimes that I was a human GPS with better hair. My name's Dean Talcott. I'm not the survivalist type, not really. I didn't grow up skinning rabbits or building fires with sticks. I was a city kid, Oakland born and raised, but I had this thing for the outdoors. It was my escape. Eventually I figured if I could make a living from it, why not? But yeah, that's how I ended up in Shasta Trinity with a government badge, a radio clipped to my belt, and a whole lot of experience in finding lost hikers. The call came in around noon. A family of 4 went missing near Horse Mountain Ridge. They were camping but hadn't returned, and their last contact with anyone was 3 days ago. That was a red flag. 3 days with no communication in a forest like Shasta? Not a good sign. I packed up and headed out with 2 other rangers, Tom and Eric. Solid guys, both of them. We'd worked together for a while, and we knew how to cover ground fast. The hike to the ridge wasn't bad. The terrain was steep but manageable. Tom cracked a joke about how the only thing worse than a missing family was missing lunch. Eric groaned, but it lightened the mood. We all knew how these things went. Either you found them alive, dehydrated, and a little freaked out, or you found them cooled, stiff, and too late. But this time was different. About 5 hours into our search, we split up to cover more ground. I headed toward a rocky outcrop that gave a good view of the surrounding area, hoping I could spot some smoke from a campfire, maybe even a bright tent. As I climbed, the trees started thinning out, and the silence settled in heavy. Not the peaceful kind you expect in the forest. This felt wrong. You could hear the wind, but it was muted, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. My mind wandered. Maybe it was the altitude or just the tension of the search. Then I found the first one. I spotted the orange first, a bright jacket half covered in dirt. It was a girl, maybe 8 or 9. She was face down in a shallow depression, her arms twisted under her body in a way that didn't look right. My stomach dropped, and I knelt beside her, hoping she was just unconscious. But when I turned her over, her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. The skin around her mouth was torn, raw, like she'd been biting her lips hard enough to bleed. I radioed in immediately, told Tom and Eric to regroup with me. I wasn't alone long. About 10 minutes after I found the girl, I heard something, a rustling in the trees, something heavy moving fast. At first I thought it was Tom or Eric catching up. Then it came again, closer, too fast, too heavy. I stood up, scanning the tree line, my hand instinctively reaching for the knife strapped to my belt. And then I saw it. A part of it. Just the back of its head at first, moving through the trees like it didn't give a damn who heard it. Tall, way taller than me, and I'm 6'1". It had fur, matted and dark, but it wasn't a bear. The shoulders were wrong, too broad, too hunched. It was walking upright, though its movements were jerky, like it wasn't used to its own limbs. I froze. My brain scrambled for answers. Cougar? No, too big. Human in a ghillie suit? Possible, but why would someone be up here in that? The thing kept moving, passing through the trees like it owned the place. Then it stopped. It turned its head just enough for me to see part of its face. I don't even know if I can call it a face. It was more like a mash of animal features, but none of them made sense together. The snout was short, too blunt to be canine. The skin on its face wasn't fur-covered like the rest of it, but instead patchy, almost like it had been burned or scraped raw. It didn't look at me directly, but I swear it knew I was there. Before I could react, the radio crackled. Tom's voice, all business now, asking for my location. I answered, my eyes still locked on the trees. The thing had vanished, disappeared into the dense brush without making another sound. When Tom and Eric arrived, I told them about the girl. They saw her and knew it was bad, but I didn't mention what I'd seen. Not yet. We still had 3 more bodies to find. And that thing, I wasn't sure if it was even real. Maybe the altitude was screwing with my head. We spent another hour searching before Eric called out. He'd found another body, a man this time, but something was wrong. When I got to the scene, I saw what he meant. The guy wasn't just dead, he'd been torn open. His chest was a mess, ribs broken, skin shredded like something had clawed right through him. No animal does that, not in this forest. I kept quiet, though. No point in spooking the others. We radioed it in, called for backup. This was way beyond a simple rescue mission now. They needed to send in the state troopers, maybe even federal authorities. By the time night fell, we still hadn't found the other 2 family members. We set up camp nearby, too exhausted to make the trek back. Tom didn't say much, but Eric, who was always the talker, kept throwing out theories. Maybe it was a mountain lion, he said. Maybe the guy had fallen and gotten dragged off by a bear after the fact. But I could tell from the look on his face that he didn't believe a word of it. Around midnight I heard it again. That same heavy movement through the trees, closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped out of my tent as quietly as I could. Eric was already awake, sitting up in his tent, wide-eyed. We locked eyes but said nothing. I motioned for him to follow and we crept toward the edge of the campsite. There it was again. That shape. Moving through the darkness, not caring about the noise it made. And this time it wasn't alone. 2 of them, walking side by side, hunched, massive. I wanted to call them beasts, but they didn't move like animals. There was something almost human in their steps, something deliberate. But the way their bodies moved, that wasn't right. Too slow, too methodical, like they were stalking. I nudged Eric and we backed up, trying to get back to the tents without being noticed. We weren't so lucky. One of them stopped. It turned, and this time it looked right at me. I swear it locked onto me, like a predator that finally spotted prey it had been chasing for days. I didn't wait. I grabbed Eric by the arm and bolted. Tom woke up as we ran past, yelling after us, but I didn't have time to explain. I could hear them behind us, crashing through the trees, getting closer. And then a scream. Eric went down, something huge slamming into him from behind. I turned just in time to see it lift him off the ground like he weighed nothing. The second one wasn't far behind, coming for me. There was no time to think, only to react. I grabbed the flare gun from my belt and fired it straight at the thing charging me. The flare hit it in the chest and it howled, this deep guttural roar that echoed through the forest. It dropped Eric, but I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran, legs burning, lungs on fire, but I ran like I'd never run before. I made it to the ranger station sometime just before dawn, breathless, covered in cuts and bruises. They asked about Tom and Eric. I told them what I could, but I left out the part about those creatures. What was I supposed to say? It took sewage teams 3 days to find Tom. Eric's body never turned up. Later, when they asked if I wanted to go back to Shasta Trinity, I told them I'd think about it. But I already knew. I wasn't going back. On the job, I've seen all kinds of things. People lost, injured, sometimes worse. I've been doing this long enough that not much surprises me anymore. It was 2007 when I found myself in the Cascades, specifically in an area we call Dead Man's Canyon. I know the name's not a joke or some dark humor. Folks actually started calling it that after 3 hikers vanished without a trace back in the 90s. But I'm not one for ghost stories or rumors. I'm a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service. My job is to find people and bring them back, and I try to keep things simple. It was a call about 2 missing campers that brought me out there. A couple, early 30s, regular city types who thought they'd escaped the urban grind by heading into the wilderness for a weekend. No big deal. Happens all the time. People underestimate the woods and they forget that nature doesn't care about your GPS or your carefully planned itinerary. But this one wasn't like any other case I'd handled. We had a light team that day, just me, a guy named Reese, and some part-timers from the volunteer group. The plan was basic: split up, cover more ground, and regroup in 2 hours. I headed north, following the couple's last known trail. I remember thinking that this was probably just another case of folks losing their way or getting a little too brave with the local wildlife. Reese had a theory that the missing couple had probably gotten tangled with a bear. He always had a thing about bears. I hadn't gone far before I found the first sign that something wasn't right. It wasn't tracks or anything like that. It was quieter than that. It was the absence of noise that threw me off. The woods around here were usually alive with the usual sounds of nature. But that day, nothing. Not a single bird or even the rustle of a branch. It was like the whole forest had hit mute. As I kept walking, the quiet began to feel heavier. I'm not the type to get spooked easily. Working search and rescue will break you of that. But this felt different. I found myself paying extra attention to the ground. You learn to read the woods in ways most people don't. Footsteps, fallen branches, disturbed soil. It tells you where someone's been and where they're headed. And that's when I saw it. Blood. Not the usual type you'd find from a cut or scrape either. This was more like a trail, smeared thick and leading deeper into the trees. My first instinct, a predator? But that was wrong. There was something else in the way it was spread. The shape, the erratic direction. It looked like someone had been dragged. I kept going, moving slow, hand instinctively on the knife strapped to my belt. Not that it'd do much against a bear, but you don't head out here unarmed. What I found next made me stop in my tracks. It was a body, or at least what was left of one. Torn apart isn't even the right word. More like shredded. Limbs bent at angles that shouldn't exist. Skin ripped in chunks, and the smell. Christ, the smell. I've dealt with death, but this was beyond anything I'd ever seen. And I knew right away it wasn't an animal attack. No bear does that. There was something about the way the body had been left. It felt intentional, like someone or something had wanted it to be found. I radioed Reese, told him I had found one of the campers. He asked for details, but I kept it vague. There was no point in trying to explain over the radio. I didn't even know how to describe it myself. And then I heard it. It wasn't loud. It was more like a sound carried by the wind, barely there but unmistakable. It was a screech, not mechanical, not animal, but something in between. Like metal scraping against metal, but too raw, too organic to be anything man-made. I'm not proud to say it, but I hesitated. My instincts told me to turn back, to radio for more help, to not go any further. But I've got a job to do, and I'm stubborn as hell. I kept going, following the trail of blood and carnage deeper into the trees. That's when I found the second body. This one was different. It was laid out in a clearing, almost posed. Like whoever or whatever had killed them had taken the time to arrange the body in a grotesque display. The arms were stretched out, the mouth open wide, and the chest. It was hollowed out, like something had been scooped right out of them. Then I noticed something else. Something that made me want to turn back for real this time. Footprints. They weren't human. They were too large, too wide, with claw marks where toes should have been. And there were more of them than there should be. Like whoever made them had extra limbs, walking on more than two legs. I kneeled down, running my hand over the impressions. It wasn't a bear, that much was clear. At this point, I should have called it in. I should have turned around and headed back to base. But something about the whole scene pulled me deeper. I've been told I'm too curious for my own good. Maybe that's what gets me into trouble. I followed the tracks. They led into a ravine, the trees getting thicker and the light dimmer. That screeching sound was there again, louder this time, almost like it was mocking me, daring me to come closer. I kept my hand on my knife, feeling the weight of it more than usual. The smell hit me before I saw it, rotting flesh. It clung to the air, thick and suffocating. I found myself gagging, trying to breathe through my mouth, but it didn't help much. Then I saw where it was coming from. There, in the middle of the ravine, was a pile. A heap of bones, flesh and bodies all mixed together. Some were fresh, others decomposing. I could see scraps of clothing, bits of camping gear, even a few personal items. But what stuck out the most was the fact that not all of it was human. Whatever had been hunting them, it had left parts of itself behind. I could see fragments, Claws, maybe, or teeth. Something sharp and unnatural. There were too many to make sense of it all. And then I saw movement. Slow at first, like something stretching or waking up. From the corner of my eye, I caught the silhouette of something massive. Something wrong. It moved with a deliberate slowness, like it knew I was watching but didn't care. I stood still, my heart racing in a way that felt like a drumbeat in my throat. My mind couldn't quite process what I was seeing. It was like an oversized spider, but wrong in every way imaginable. The body was elongated, its limbs impossibly long, and its head. It had no features I could recognize. But the worst part was the way it seemed to shimmer in the dim light, almost like it was there, but not fully there. The screech came again, and this time it was close. Too close. I could feel it vibrating in my bones. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I turned and ran. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I've been through plenty, but there's a fine line between bravery and stupidity, and I was pretty sure crossing it would mean I'd end up just another body in that pile. Running through the woods, I could hear it behind me. Not fast, not like it was chasing, but following. Like it enjoyed the chase. Every snap of a branch, every crunch of a leaf sounded like a death sentence. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I radioed Reese again, told him I was on my way back. He started asking questions, but I cut him off. There was no time for explanations. When I made it to the rendezvous point, Reese was already there. He took one look at me wide-eyed and asked if I'd seen the bear. I just stared at him, thinking that if only it had been that simple. We left the area shortly after. Reese didn't press me for more details, and I didn't offer any. Some things are better left unsaid. But here's the kicker. When we got back to base, I filed my report. Left out the parts that didn't make sense. Said it was likely a predator, maybe even a human attacker. It was easier that way. But the next morning, when I went back with a bigger team, everything was gone. I don't mean the bodies, though. Those were still there in the exact same positions. It was the tracks, the trail, the claw marks, all of it. Like whatever had been there didn't want to be found. Or maybe it just didn't need to leave evidence anymore. I'll tell you one thing. I'm not going back to Dead Man's Canyon again. I wasn't really built for search and rescue. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm good at it, but I didn't wake up one day dreaming of saving lost hikers. Back in '97, when I started out, I figured I'd just be signing up to lead tourists through the forest of Montana, maybe rescue a few campers who got too close to a bear. What I got instead was a never-ending loop of sleepless nights and missing persons reports. None of them prepared me for what went down in Butte County in 2003. I'm Carl, by the way. Carl Adams. Been doing this job longer than I care to admit. Most people think it's all about tracking footprints and following trails of broken branches. Yeah, that's the easy part. What they don't tell you about are the times when the missing folks don't come back in one piece. If they come back at all. I was stationed in a remote stretch of forest outside Butte, near the Montana-Idaho border. It's dense, wild country. The kind that swallows people whole if they're dumb enough to go wandering without a map or a clue. That was my post. The last stop between clueless city slickers and the kind of wilderness that doesn't give second chances. It was early July. The days had been quiet, and I was actually looking forward to a bit of a break when the call came in. A group of 4 hikers, all college kids from Washington, hadn't returned to their campsite. Their friends were getting worried, said they hadn't heard from them in 48 hours. Normally, I'd chalk it up to kids partying, maybe getting lost or camping off trail. But something about the tone of the dispatcher's voice made the hairs on my neck stand up. We were told to move fast, no delay. By the time we got out there, it was nearly dusk. The light barely cut through the dense trees, and the forest felt oppressive, like it was holding its breath. My partner for the search was Martin, a younger guy who'd joined the force a couple years back. He was still in that phase where he thought every case would turn out fine, like they'd just find the kids huddled by a campfire telling ghost stories. He didn't know better yet. We started along the trail they were last spotted on, calling out their names, hoping for a response. I'd done this routine too many times to count. Martin had this habit of talking to fill the silence, something about how he once got lost as a kid and found his way back by following a stream. I didn't respond. The quiet out there was too heavy, like something was pressing down on us from all sides. An hour in, we found the first sign, a torn backpack near a rock face. Not just dropped or abandoned, but ripped wide open. The fabric was shredded like someone or something had taken claws to it. That's when Martin's chatter stopped. He looked at me, eyes wide, but didn't say a word. We both knew something was wrong. We pressed on, slower now, weapons at the ready. You don't carry a gun for bears out here. Bears don't tear through nylon like that. I kept scanning the trees, but it wasn't the kind of danger you could see. It was the feeling of being watched. You know that old saying, the trees have eyes? Well, it felt like that, only the trees didn't need eyes. Whatever was out there had us in its sights. 2 miles further in, the trail opened into a small clearing. That's where we found the first body. It was one of the hikers, a young guy, no older than 22. His body was torn, limbs splayed out like a rag doll, but not by an animal. This was methodical, too precise. Pieces of him were missing, like someone had taken their time pulling him apart. His face, let's just say I didn't need to check for a pulse. Martin gagged. I wanted to crack a joke about weak stomachs, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. This wasn't the kind of thing you laugh off. We radioed back to base. Told them we had a casualty, but no sign of the others. They told us to stay put, wait for backup. But staying put wasn't an option. Not when there were 3 more kids out there, possibly still alive. Or worse. We kept moving, faster now, every rustle of leaves making me jump. I'd been on enough hunts to know when something wasn't right, and this whole situation stank of it. We found the second body maybe 100 yards further. A girl this time. She was broken, like someone had twisted her limbs at unnatural angles. Her eyes were open, frozen in an expression of pure terror. And again, parts of her were just missing. Martin stopped in his tracks. What the hell could do this? I didn't answer. Mostly because I didn't know. My mind raced through the possibilities. Mountain lions, wolves, some unholy mix of the two. But nothing fit. Not with this kind of violence. This wasn't an animal attack. We should have turned back right then, but we didn't. Maybe it was the thought that someone was still alive out there. Or maybe it was stupidity, plain and simple. We pressed on, and the forest seemed to close in tighter around us with every step. We found the third hiker about 20 minutes later. This one was hanging from a tree, strung up like a warning. His body was mutilated in ways I can't even describe. I'll spare you the details, but let's just say it wasn't quick. Someone had taken their time. Someone. That was the first moment I realized we weren't alone out there. Martin lost it then, started mumbling about getting out, about calling for backup. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Whoever or whatever had done this wasn't going to let us walk out of those woods. Not now. We'd seen too much. Then we heard it. The snapping of branches, footsteps, slow and deliberate coming from deeper in the trees. At first I thought it was another hiker, one of the missing kids maybe, but the sound wasn't right. Too heavy, too deliberate. I raised my rifle, motioned for Martin to stay close. My heart was pounding, and for a second I wondered if this was it, if this was how it would end. And then it stepped out of the shadows. It wasn't human, not entirely. I'd seen wild animals before, but this thing, it was different. Taller than any man, its body covered in a patchwork of fur and skin. Human skin. Pieces of it stitched together like some kind of grotesque trophy. Its face was elongated, like a wolf's, but wrong. Too smooth, too knowing. It didn't move like an animal. It moved like it had a purpose. Martin screamed. I fired. The thing didn't flinch. It moved faster than anything I've ever seen, closing the distance between us in seconds. I grabbed Martin, pulling him to the ground as it swiped at the air above our heads. We scrambled, half running, half crawling through the underbrush, the thing's footsteps pounding behind us. I don't know how we made it out of there. Adrenaline, maybe. Fear, definitely. But we didn't stop running until we burst through the tree line and into the open. We were met by backup. 2 trucks full of guys who didn't know what the hell they were walking into. I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come out. Martin was useless, shaking and muttering to himself. They took us back to base, but I didn't sleep that night. Or the night after. They found the fourth hiker the next day. Or what was left of her. The bodies were all recovered. The official report said wild animal attack, but anyone who was out there knows the truth. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human either. We never went back to that part of the forest. Not officially, at least. But sometimes late at night, I think about that thing, still out there, still watching, waiting for the next group of dumb hikers to wander too far off the trail. And maybe, just maybe, it's still hungry. The worst part of working in the Allegheny National Forest isn't the terrain, though it's not friendly. It isn't the cold, the long stretches of radio silence, or even the rare encounters with black bears. It's the silence. It settles in thick crawling under your skin. And when you've been out here as long as I have, you start hearing things that shouldn't be there. It was 2003, and my name's Matt Vickers. I've been with Search and Rescue for about 11 years, working out of Warren County, Pennsylvania. I'm the guy they send when people go missing out here, which happens more than you'd think. Funny enough, I'm not really much of a camper myself, but, you know, you go where the work is. The outdoorsy types always expect me to say I'm passionate about the wilderness, but I just prefer my paycheck to come with a decent health plan. That day started like any other. We got a call about a missing hiker. A woman, about 35, hadn't checked back in after her solo trip. Now, solo trips aren't uncommon out here. People come to escape their lives, clear their heads. Problem is, nature doesn't care if you're looking for clarity. It'll swallow you whole. And with Allegheny's dense forests and tricky paths, I always wonder why anyone risks it alone. Then again, I've got a twisted sense of humor. If someone vanishes, they probably just got tired of their suburban life. Maybe they're sipping on a mojito in Mexico while I'm trudging through the mud. I met up with the volunteer crew around noon. Local guys, good folks, but they're more into the social aspect of the job. They want to be the hero without considering the fact that heroism out here usually involves hauling a body bag. We split into groups, and I got paired with one of the younger guys, Matt Lee. First thing out of his mouth was a joke about how I should have retired by now. "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" he asked me. "I already did, kid," I said, looking out into the woods. That's why I'm still here. We trekked along the South Branch Trail for hours. The air felt off, like it was sitting heavier than it should. Matt was eager, taking point and cracking jokes, but I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched. I've been in these woods too long to ignore that itch at the back of my neck. "Hey, Vickers," Matt said, snapping me out of it. "You ever find someone out here that wasn't, all there when you found them?" "What do you mean, all there?" "You know, like missing pieces." He laughed, but it was nervous. "Once," I said, not elaborating. That shut him up. The thing about Allegheny is that it has this way of making things disappear. Not the way people imagine, though. You expect a struggle, signs of panic, but here it's just like people walk off the path and poof, they're gone. No sound, no clues. The earth just swallows them. After another couple of hours, we stumbled across a clearing that wasn't on any map. It was small, barely noticeable, and the trees around it looked wrong. Like they'd been growing at odd angles, reaching in different directions, but not toward the sun. I've seen a lot of strange formations out here, but this one felt deliberate, like the land itself was bending to avoid something. "Looks like someone made a camp here," Matt said, crouching down by a fire pit. But the thing is, it wasn't a fire pit. Not really. The stones were too close together, stacked in a way that didn't make sense. And the ground? Freshly dug, but no shovel marks. "Yeah," I muttered. "Someone tried to make it look that way." Matt was already poking around, and I could see his face shift from curiosity to something a little more serious. "You got a light?" he asked. I handed him my flashlight, and he shined it toward a small mound in the middle of the so-called camp. His face went pale. "Vickers, what the hell is that?" It took me a second to process. It was a foot, not just any foot, a woman's, half buried in the dirt. Clean cut at the ankle like someone had taken a hacksaw to it. The nails were painted a bright red, chipped but still noticeable. Whoever she was, she'd cared enough about appearances before. Well, before. Matt gagged, stumbled backward. I didn't. You get used to it in this line of work, though this was one of the cleaner cuts I'd seen. I crouched down, trying to piece together the scene. This isn't where she died, I said. This is staged. Matt was barely holding it together. What do you mean? Someone just left her here? Not her, I corrected. Just a part of her. Then it clicked. The fire pit. That wasn't a campsite, it was a marker, a way to make us stop. Someone wanted us to find this. Who the hell would do that? Matt asked, his voice trembling now. I didn't answer. Truth is, I didn't know. But I've been around long enough to know when something's off. This wasn't some backwoods psychopath hiding bodies. This was a message. We radioed it in, but by the time the rest of the crew showed up, it was getting dark. And there's an unspoken rule in these woods. You don't stay after sunset. We marked the spot and agreed to come back with more gear in the morning. Matt was still shaken up and I couldn't blame him. First time seeing something like that tends to mess with your head. Me? I was more concerned with the fact that someone had gone through the trouble of leaving a foot behind, knowing full well we'd find it. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that clearing, those trees, how unnatural they felt, like the woods themselves had recoiled from that place. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that nonsense, but there's something about Allegheny that goes beyond explanation. It eats people, plain and simple. We went back at first light, bringing a couple more guys with us. This time I was leading, and I noticed something I hadn't before. There were no birds. Not one sound, no rustling, nothing. Even the insects seemed quieter than usual. We reached the clearing again, but the foot was gone, not dragged off by animals, gone. The dirt wasn't even disturbed. Matt looked at me, panic rising in his eyes. Vickers, we marked it, right? We did. I checked the GPS twice, the coordinates lined up. No mistake. But the mound, the stones, all of it, vanished. That's when I knew we weren't alone out here. Matt was losing it, rambling about how things like this didn't just happen. The other guys were confused, asking if we were in the right spot. I shut them down, knowing this wasn't a conversation to have out here. But I could feel it now, that crawling sensation under my skin. We were being watched, and it wasn't by some animal. I signaled for us to spread out, search the surrounding area. I didn't expect to find anything, hell, I didn't want to, but protocol's protocol. Matt stuck close to me, still rattling off questions I didn't have answers to. That's when I heard it, a snap, just beyond the tree line. It was faint, but enough to make me stop dead. I motioned for Matt to be quiet and moved toward the noise. It was getting closer. A rustle, a soft movement, like someone trying to sneak through the underbrush but not quite getting the hang of it. I pulled out my knife, the only weapon I had on me. Stupid. Should have brought something better. Then I saw it. Standing just beyond the trees was a figure. Tall, hunched, with limbs that looked too long for its body, covered in patchy fur and streaks of what I can only describe as mud, or maybe blood. It moved awkwardly, almost like it was learning how to walk. I froze, trying to process what I was seeing. This thing, it wasn't human. But it wasn't just some animal either. It tilted its head, almost like it was studying me. Its face, if you could call it that, was like someone had tried to mash a human and a wolf together but failed miserably. I could hear Matt behind me, breathing hard, but he hadn't seen it yet. Then it moved fast. I barely had time to react before it was on top of me. It slammed into me with a force I didn't expect from something so gangly. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. My knife clattered away, useless now. I could hear Matt shouting my name, but it was muffled, like my brain couldn't quite process the sound. The thing hovered over me, its breath hot and rancid, and I finally got a good look at its face. Elongated, like someone had pulled too hard on its skin. The patchy fur up close wasn't fur at all. It It was more like coarse hair, slick with something dark and wet. The smell, Christ, it smelled like rot, decay. Whatever this thing was, it had been killing and for a long time. I kicked at it, scrambling to get away, but it was fast. Too fast. Its hand, no, its claw, raked across my leg, and I felt the sharp sting of nails cutting through my pants into my flesh. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the pain, adrenaline kicking in as I rolled to the side and grabbed the knife. I swung wildly, catching it across the arm. The creature shrieked, not like an animal, but almost like a child in pain, high-pitched and wrong. It backed off, and that gave me just enough time to get to my feet. Matt was there, pulling me up by the arm, his face pale as hell. "We have to go, now!" he yelled, his voice finally breaking through the haze in my head. I didn't argue. We ran, crashing through the brush like our lives depended on it, because they did. Behind us, I could hear the thing moving, following, but not as fast as before. It was hurt, but it wasn't stopping. Not yet. We reached the rest of the group. I could see the confusion on their faces, the panic starting to set in as Matt screamed at them to move, to get out of the woods. But no one listened. They hadn't seen it. They didn't know. One of the guys, Matt Bennett, stepped forward, trying to calm everyone down. "Bickers, what the hell is going on?" Before I could answer, the thing lunged out from the trees, crashing into Bennett like a freight train. His scream cut through the air, sharp and short. He didn't have time to fight. It tore into him, ripping at his chest, pulling flesh and bone apart like it was nothing. The blood sprayed across the clearing, and the rest of us were frozen in place. I could hear Matt Lee swearing under his breath, and something snapped inside me. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was acting. I grabbed a branch from the ground and swung it as hard as I could, smashing it against the creature's head. It staggered back, surprised, its focus shifting from Bennett's lifeless body to me. I braced myself for the next attack, but it didn't come. The creature growled low, no, not growl, something deeper, more guttural, vibrating through the air, and then it did something I didn't expect. It turned and disappeared into the trees. For a moment, none of us moved. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind that weighs heavy on your chest. Matt was the first to break it, stumbling toward Bennett's body, but there was nothing to do. He was dead, torn apart. What the hell was that?" one of the other guys asked, his voice shaky. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I didn't have an explanation, and frankly, I wasn't sure I wanted one. We radioed for help, though I wasn't sure how I'd explain this. "Some kind of animal," I muttered, my voice hollow. It must have been sick. But I knew that wasn't true. I knew we hadn't just encountered an animal. By the time the backup arrived, the creature was long gone. The cleanup crew found Bennett's body, or what was left of it. They didn't find anything else. No tracks, no signs of the thing that attacked us. It was as if the forest had swallowed the evidence whole, but not Bennett. Not his blood. The rest of the team was quiet, too shaken to process what we'd seen. When the authorities came asking questions, we gave them what they wanted to hear. Bear attack. It wasn't a great lie, but it was all we had. And no one was going to argue with that, not when there was a body to bury. Matt left the team a few days later. He couldn't handle it. The others followed suit over the next year. No one talked about what happened, at least not to anyone outside the unit. I stayed on. It's what I do. But the silence in the forest, it's different now. It's not just quiet. It's listening. The Allegheny woods, don't forget. That much I've learned. You can walk through them 100 times, but every now and then, you'll feel it. That wrongness. That sense that something's watching you, studying you. I still go out on search and rescue missions, but I don't go alone. And I don't go at night. I found out later that there were stories, old ones, about something that lived in these woods. The locals don't talk about it much, but if you ask the right people, they'll tell you about it. They say it's a predator, something that's always been here, long before we came and cut down trees and built trails. They don't have a name for it, though. Maybe it's better that way. Sometimes I think about leaving, packing up, and finding work somewhere safer. But I've been here too long. I know these woods too well, and whatever's out there, well, maybe it knows me too. I've spent almost a decade working for the United States Forest Service, and I've seen my share of strange things out in the woods. It's funny, I got into this job thinking it would be mostly about rescuing lost hikers or dealing with wildfires. But what I never expected was how many times I'd find myself neck deep in something way outside the norm. Then again, when you grow up in a town of 600 people in eastern Montana, you learn pretty quickly that the quiet places have the most to hide. This happened back in 2011, and it still sticks with me. Not that I dwell on it, but every now and then, when I'm out alone in the woods, I get that feeling again, like something's watching. But not today. Today, I'm just getting this out of my head. My name's Barrett Halford, by the way, and I'm one of those guys that can laugh at pretty much anything, even when I probably shouldn't. Self-defense mechanism, I guess. You have to learn to crack a joke or this job will eat you alive. Like this one time I had to help a guy who got himself stuck in a tree trying to escape a black bear. Told him we were going to make it his permanent address if he didn't stop flailing. Anyway, the point is, you see a lot in this line of work, but what happened in the Bridger Teton National Forest? That was different. So, here's the deal. I was out with a couple of the guys from the service. We had a call about a missing couple, newlyweds, of all things. Apparently, they decided to honeymoon in the woods. I guess that sounded romantic to them, but when I hear newlyweds in the wild, I think, great, two people who definitely don't know how to camp. But hey, who am I to judge? The call came in after they'd missed their scheduled check-in with the park ranger, so it was day 2 without any word from them. It was me, Chris Hawley, and a new guy, Sam Delgado, who hadn't yet learned that he should never ask what we're eating for dinner when we're out this far. I once told him squirrel stew just to see his face. We started the search at the trailhead where their car was parked. Basic stuff, fan out, stick together, check all the usual routes. But the thing that stuck out right away was how wrong everything felt. For one, the trail itself was just off. I know that sounds vague, but the trees around us, the way the ground was, it didn't look like a well-used path. Almost like it was growing back, quickly, like the forest didn't want people there. Holly even made a joke about it, something like, "Looks like we're walking into the land that time forgot." I laughed, of course, because that's what you do. You laugh, you keep moving. You pretend that creeping sensation isn't sliding down your spine. We split up to cover more ground, but I took Sam with me. I didn't trust him to be out on his own yet. We hadn't gone too far when we saw the first sign that something was very wrong. There was a campsite, but it wasn't theirs. Old, abandoned, and covered in vines, like nature had given up on it years ago. Sam, being the rookie, asked if we should check it out. "Hell no," I said. "We're not here to camp. Let's find those people." That's when we heard it. Screaming. Not that kind of scream you get when someone's lost or maybe they broke an ankle. No, this was raw, full-on terror. And it was close. I yelled to Hawley over the radio. He was about half a mile out but started running toward us. Sam and I bolted through the trees, my heart pounding not just from the exertion but from knowing whatever we were heading toward wasn't going to be good. You get a sense for that in this line of work. Like an animal instinct. We broke through the tree line into a small clearing, and that's when we saw it. There was blood, too much of it, splattered across the ground, staining the rocks, like someone had exploded from the inside out. It was fresh. There were no bodies, just this mess. Like whatever happened was violent and quick. Sam muttered something under his breath, and I don't blame him. My mind went to predators at first. Wolves, maybe. But this wasn't like any wolf attack I'd ever seen. There were deep gouges in the ground, the trees around us scratched up like something had been dragging bodies. No footprints. No tracks at all, in fact, and that was the part that chilled me. Even a bear leaves something behind. This was clean, too clean. Then we saw the body, or at least what was left of it. A torso, mangled and torn apart, no arms, no head. Just a broken rib cage and entrails smeared around like someone's grotesque idea of art. Sam started retching, and I almost did too. But I kept it together. Hawley caught up to us about a minute later, and I'll never forget the look on his face. It was the kind of look that said we're way out of our depth. We didn't talk much after that. We just moved fast, backtracking along the trail, eyes darting around like we expected something to come crashing through the trees at any second. I don't know what I was looking for, but every time the wind picked up it sounded wrong, like something bigger was moving through the forest, just out of sight. We hit the main trail and radioed it in. Standard procedure, right? Tell base, get a report file, but here's the thing. No one was answering. Not just static, like the signal was out. Just nothing. Holly and I exchanged looks. Sam was pale, eyes wide, like he was realizing what he'd signed up for. I thought about telling him to quit while he still had a shred of sanity, but that wouldn't have done any good. I could feel it, though. Something was out there with us. We were being watched, followed, and whatever it wasn't friendly. I made the call to head back to the vehicles, which was a solid 2 miles away, through the woods. We moved as fast as we could without running, and the whole time it felt like the trees were closing in on us. You know that feeling when you're a kid, and you think there's something under your bed? It was that, but worse, because this wasn't in my head. I could feel it. Something was close. Sam was the first to break. He bolted ahead of us, running like a scared rabbit, and that's when I heard it. A sound I can't describe. Not really, but it wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal I'd ever heard before. It was like something ripping through the air, sharp and wet. Then Sam was screaming, and it cut off just as quickly as it started. We found him 30 yards ahead, hanging from a tree by his legs. His neck had been snapped, head twisted all the way around like someone had wrung him out like a dishcloth. His face, though, he was staring wide-eyed at something in the distance. Even in death, he looked terrified. Holly and I didn't waste any time after that. We got out of there as fast as we could, not stopping for anything. I don't know how we made it back to the vehicles, but when we did, we found something waiting for us. The couple's car was still there, but the doors were open, and inside was, well, I guess you'd call it what was left of them. Shredded, just like the body in the clearing, only this time there was a deliberate pattern to it, like whatever did this wanted to make sure we knew it wasn't just a wild animal. This was deliberate. I remember staring at their faces, or what was left of them, and thinking, whatever did this, it's still out there. Watching. Waiting. I wish I could say we called for backup, but that's not what happened. Instead, Holly and I left. We got in our truck and drove out of there without looking back. I don't know what got into us, but something told me we weren't safe until we were out of those woods. It wasn't until we hit the nearest town that we stopped and made the call. The official report? A bear attack. That's what we wrote down. No one argued and no one questioned it. But I've been doing this long enough to know what a bear can do. And that wasn't a bear. I went back once, a year later, out of some misplaced sense of duty, I guess. The area had been closed off after the incident, but I found a way in. I don't know what I was expecting to find, maybe answers. What I found instead was worse. The campsite was gone. Not just abandoned like before, but wiped clean. No sign of the bodies, the blood, the carnage. Nothing but trees and undergrowth where there should have been memories. I didn't stick around to see if it came back. Some things are better left buried in the past. What I do know is this. Whatever did that, it's still out there. And maybe one day I'll be stupid enough to go looking for it again. When people ask why I chose this job, I usually tell them it's for the adventure, not because of a deep-seated desire to save lives or because I want to connect with nature. No, I picked search and rescue because it keeps things simple. I find people, I bring them home. That's the job. Sounds easy, right? It was, until that day in late September 2008, out in the middle of Coconino National Forest, Arizona. I'm Pierce Gunnarsson, a no-nonsense, straight-talking guy. No kids, no wife. I'm a free agent, which helps, considering this job can pull you out of bed at 3 a.m. My life is simple, and that's the way I like it. Or at least, it used to be. It started with the usual routine. A couple of campers went missing near the Mogollon Rim. The call came in late afternoon, and I remember thinking how it was probably just another pair of hikers who lost track of time. People always think the forest is their personal playground until they realize how massive and unforgiving it is. I packed up and drove out, figuring I'd be home in a few hours, grab a beer, and call it a night. I was wrong. By the time I reached the campsite, it was getting dark. Perfect timing, because apparently, SR folks love chasing shadows in the dark. I parked my truck, grabbed my gear, and followed the faint path the campers had taken. According to the report, they'd ventured off into a more remote part of the forest. Typical amateur mistake, trying to go off-trail like they're some kind of wilderness expert after watching one too many survival shows. I followed the signs, a boot print here, a snapped twig there, but something was off. It didn't feel right. I've been doing this long enough to notice when something's wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but there was this feeling gnawing at me. Like I wasn't just being watched, but sized up, you know? Still, I shrugged it off. Figured I'd had one too many cups of bad gas station coffee. An hour in, I found the first clue that something wasn't normal. The ground was torn up like something heavy had moved through. I'd seen enough animal tracks to know what a bear could do, but this was something else. The dirt was gouged deep, way deeper than any animal I've ever seen. I got down on one knee, trying to figure out what the hell could have left it, and that's when I heard it. A scream. High-pitched, terrified, and definitely human. That kind of scream that makes your skin crawl because it's filled with pure panic. I bolted in the direction of the sound, adrenaline kicking in. I'm not ashamed to say I was scared. I don't scare easily, but this was different. I found the guy first. Well, what was left of him. He was lying in a small clearing, limbs twisted at impossible angles. His face, I can't even describe it, was contorted in this permanent mask of terror. There were scratches and tears all over him, but not the kind that an animal makes. These were precise, deliberate, like something was playing with him before it finally finished him off. I should have called for backup right then. Standard protocol. But I didn't. Stupid. I know. But in the heat of the moment, all I could think about was finding the other camper, the woman. Maybe she was still alive. The forest felt different now. I could swear the trees had closed in, the air thick with this oppressive weight, like I was walking into something I wasn't supposed to see. It took me another 15 minutes of tracking before I found her. She was crouched at the base of a massive pine tree, rocking back and forth, muttering something over and over. She looked up at me with these wide, frantic eyes, but it wasn't me she was seeing. She was somewhere else entirely. I knelt down and tried to talk to her, calm her down, but she just kept repeating one word, over and over again. Fast. I tried to get her to say more, but that was it, just fast. Whatever had come for them, it was fast. That much I could gather. I had to get her out of there. But as I reached for my radio, that gnawing feeling returned, stronger now. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. We weren't alone. The woman's eyes flicked past me, focusing on something in the trees behind us. I don't know if you've ever felt pure, unfiltered dread before, but that's what hit me right then. I turned slowly, not sure if I wanted to see what she was staring at, but I had to. In the dim light, I saw movement. It was subtle at first, like a shadow shifting just outside your vision. Then it stepped into view. At first glance, it looked like a mountain lion, but bigger. Too big. Its fur was matted, dirty, and its limbs were all wrong. Too long. Too muscular. The way it moved, it was unnatural, like it didn't belong here. Like it had crawled out of some twisted, nightmarish version of the forest. The most unsettling thing was the way it stood on its hind legs for a moment. Like it was testing the air, deciding whether we were worth the trouble. I pulled out my knife. Not that it would do much against something like this, but it was the only thing I had. My gun was back in the truck, because of course I wasn't expecting to need it. The woman started screaming again, and that was it. The thing moved. Fast didn't even cover it. It covered the distance between us in seconds, and all I could do was shove the woman aside and dive for the ground. It swiped at me, and I felt something tear through my jacket, but I kept rolling, scrambling to my feet. I didn't have time to think. My body just moved, pure instinct. I grabbed the woman and ran. There was no plan, no direction, just run. Behind us, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, snapping branches like twigs. It was toying with us, enjoying the chase. I glanced back once, just long enough to see it darting between the trees, keeping pace without even breaking a sweat. The terrain got rougher, steeper. The woman stumbled, nearly pulling me down with her, but I dragged her back up, adrenaline making me stronger than I'd ever been. But it wasn't enough. I knew we weren't going to outrun it. That's when I saw it. A ranger tower up ahead, half hidden by the trees. It was old, looked like it hadn't been used in years, but it was our only shot. I forced us toward it, practically dragging the woman the last few feet. I shoved her inside and slammed the door just as the thing slammed into it from the other side. The whole structure shook, the door bowing inward under the force. It let out this noise, not a roar, not anything I could compare to an animal. It was something worse, like metal grinding against bone. It scratched at the wood, trying to tear its way inside, but the door held. For now. The woman was huddled in the corner, shaking, still muttering that same word. Fast. Over and over again. I tried to radio for help, but the signal was dead. Typical. The banging stopped suddenly. Silence filled the cabin, thick and suffocating. I waited, knife in hand, every muscle in my body tensed, expecting it to crash through the walls at any moment. But nothing happened. Hours passed. The woman eventually stopped muttering and fell into a fitful sleep, but I stayed awake, listening, waiting. It was out there, I knew it, waiting for us to come out. I don't know how long we stayed in that cabin, but eventually the sun started to rise, and with it, the forest came alive again. Birds chirped, the wind rustled through the trees. It was like nothing had happened, like the nightmare had never existed. We made it out of there alive. But I know better than to think we were safe. Not really. I found the woman's family, got her out of the forest, and filed my report. Standard stuff, except I left out the details. Who'd believe me anyway? But I know what I saw. I never went back to that part of the forest again. Some things you just don't mess with. I don't care what kind of training you've had, or how much you think you know. Out there in the wild, it's not always about survival. Sometimes it's about knowing when to run. When I finally got back to the station, I threw my gear in the back of the truck, sat on the tailgate, and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because, well, what the hell else was I supposed to do? They'll probably find some other poor soul to search those woods next time, but not me. You know, in my line of work, it's not the hiking that gets you. It's not the rugged trails or the weather, though that stuff is no picnic either. Nah, it's the people, or worse, the things that aren't people. I'm Garrett Teague, a search and rescue officer with the United States Forest Service. Been at it since '97, and I've seen just about everything out here in these woods. Or so I thought. It was 2011, north of Flagstaff, Arizona. That's where this all went down. They called us in for a standard missing person case. An overnight hiker didn't make it back to his car. Happens all the time. People think they can handle these backcountry trails alone. No maps, no satellite phone. Just them and a water bottle. Darwinism at its finest, right? Anyway, we got his name. Devin Matthews. He'd been hiking around the San Francisco peaks. Not exactly a walk in the park, but manageable, if you knew what you were doing. Which, of course, Devin did not. They set me out with Tom Greer, my partner. Tom's an ex-Marine, tough as nails, but surprisingly gentle for a guy with a body like a brick wall. We had a few jokes between us, mostly about how guys like Devin, city slickers, corporate types, thought they were invincible with a pair of new hiking boots and a camelback. We reached the trailhead around 2 p.m. The weather was holding up, which was a miracle in itself. Arizona can be hellishly hot one minute and drop into the 30s the next, especially up in the higher elevations. Tom and I trekked about 2 hours up the trail, calling out Devin's name. It was standard procedure, shouting into the trees as if someone might actually answer. Of course, no one ever did. Then we found his pack. It was off the trail, tucked under a cluster of pine trees, just sitting there like someone had deliberately placed it. No signs of a struggle, no blood. Nothing to suggest that Devin had been in any kind of distress. Just his bag, untouched. I radioed it in, and Tom started rummaging through the pack, looking for any clues. He pulled out a map, a bad one, of course, with barely any landmarks on it, and a few energy bars. Standard stuff. What wasn't standard was the notebook. Tom flipped it open, expecting some sort of journal about Devon's hiking experience or maybe a checklist of supplies. Instead, the first few pages were filled with scrawled drawings, shapes that didn't make any sense. Spirals, geometric designs, some kind of strange symbols. Tom raised an eyebrow, showed me a few of the pages. "What do you make of this?" I shrugged. "Probably just some city guy trying to act deep in nature. People get weird when they're out here alone." But Tom wasn't buying it. "These symbols look familiar." He had that look in his eye, the one he got when his instincts kicked in. "What, you think he's some kind of cultist?" Tom smirked. "Don't rule it out." We followed the trail further up. As we moved higher, the air grew thinner, the trees denser. That uneasy feeling started creeping up on me, the one where your body knows something's wrong before your brain catches up. I ignored it. I had to. I've walked through some pretty strange stuff out here. Broken bones, bodies. Hell, even some guy who thought he was Bear Grylls and tried to drink from a cactus. But this was different. Another hour passed, and the forest felt quieter than it should have. No birds, no wind, just the sound of our boots on the dirt and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. We reached a clearing, a small patch of grass surrounded by towering pines. That's where we saw him. Devon Matthews was sitting in the middle of the clearing, his back turned to us, motionless. At first glance, it looked like he was just resting, maybe taking in the view. But something about the way he sat, stiff and unnatural, set me on edge. "Devon?" Tom called out. No response. We moved closer, and that's when the smell hit us. Rot, like something had been dead for a week. Tom gagged, and I covered my mouth. This wasn't right. We circled around to get a better look, and that's when I saw it. Devon's face was slack, his eyes wide open, but there was nothing behind them. He looked alive, but it was like no one was home. His skin, if you could call it that, was wrong. Pale, almost translucent, like he'd been drained of blood. But there wasn't a single wound on him. Tom knelt down, cautiously reached out to check for a pulse, but before his hand even touched Devon's wrist, something moved. Devon's head twitched, just a tiny movement, like a glitch in a bad video feed. We froze. That's when we heard it, the sound behind us. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, but they didn't belong to anything human. Tom spun around, his hand instinctively moving to the gun strapped to his waist. I followed, and that's when I saw it, just beyond the tree line. The thing that stood there wasn't something you could describe easily. The closest I could compare it to was a large, emaciated bear, but it was wrong. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and it had this skin. It looked like it had been stripped off, stretched taut over its frame, glistening in the dim light. And the smell, God, the smell was like nothing I'd ever experienced. Rot, sweat, death. It stared at us, but not with eyes. There were just pits where its eyes should have been. And then it let out this sound, this low, vibrating hum that made my teeth rattle in my skull. Before we could react, it lunged at us, moving faster than anything that size should. Tom fired a shot, but it didn't slow down. I grabbed him by the arm, pulling him backward as we ran, adrenaline kicking into overdrive. "Go! Go!" Tom shouted as we bolted down the trail, our legs burning as we scrambled over rocks and roots, the sound of that thing behind us getting closer. I glanced back, just for a second, and saw Devon. His body was no longer in the clearing. He was standing, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, and he was walking towards us. Slowly, methodically, as if every step was calculated. My heart pounded in my ears as we ran. I could hear Tom shouting into his radio for backup, but there was no response. The trees around us blurred as we pushed ourselves harder, trying to put as much distance between us and whatever that thing was. The trail seemed to stretch on forever, but finally we burst through the trees and into the parking lot where our truck was waiting. Tom threw open the door and we both scrambled inside, slamming it shut behind us. For a moment there was silence. No footsteps, no movement, nothing. I was about to say something, maybe crack a joke to break the tension, but then I saw it. Standing at the edge of the tree line, just barely visible in the fading light, was Devon. Only it wasn't Devon anymore. His body was distorted, limbs stretched out in impossible angles, his skin pale and sickly. And next to him, that thing was standing too, watching us. We didn't wait. Tom floored the gas and we tore out of there, leaving the forest behind us. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever that thing was, it had let us go. Like we weren't worth the trouble. Later that night, back at base, Tom and I tried to explain what had happened. The higher-ups chalked it up to exhaustion, stress, maybe some kind of shared hallucination. But they didn't send anyone else out there to look for Devon. And that clearing, that trail, it was officially closed off, marked as too dangerous for hikers. They never found Devon's body, not officially anyway. But Tom and I know what we saw. I haven't been back to those woods since, and I sure as hell don't plan on it. You can laugh all you want, call me paranoid, but if you ever find yourself hiking in the San Francisco peaks, just don't go alone. It's funny how something as simple as a sign can lead to disaster. That little wooden sign pointing to an old forest road, how was I supposed to know? My name's Mason Garrett, been with Search and Rescue for a decade now. In 2008, I took a wrong turn near Kalmiopsis Wilderness, Oregon, while tracking down an overdue hiker. Routine stuff, or at least I thought. The road was supposed to be closed, but there wasn't a soul around for miles, so I figured I'd use it to shave off some time. By the time I realized it had been abandoned for years, it was too late. The brush had crept across the asphalt like nature had decided this place didn't belong to anyone anymore. The forest up here gets dense, and I mean claustrophobic. You lose sight of the sky pretty quickly, and the world shrinks down to what's in front of you. I was about 20 minutes into the drive when the road narrowed too much for my truck to pass. My GPS had quit on me about 5 miles back, so I was left relying on what little cell service I could squeeze out. I parked, grabbed my pack, and hoofed it from there. I'd dealt with worse situations before, but something about this one felt off. My boots crunched over sticks and leaves, but that familiar sound, the one that usually kept me company in the woods, felt swallowed up, like the forest was waiting for me to stop moving. After about an hour, I reached the coordinates where the hiker had last pinged his phone. It was just off the trailhead of some old, overgrown logging road. The guy's name was Kyle Henderson. Mid-30s, avid camper, nothing out of the ordinary. But he'd gone silent 2 days ago and his girlfriend had called in a panic. I radioed back to base but got nothing. Must have been a dead zone. Now the Kalmiopsis is rugged. Lots of ups and downs, steep ridges. But it wasn't until I found Henderson's campsite that things got weird. The tent was still there, zipped up tight, no sign of any struggle. His pack was hanging from a tree, food untouched. But he wasn't there. No blood, no signs of an animal, just nothing. I circled around for a bit, calling his name. Nothing. That eerie silence? It was getting louder, the kind that makes your skin itch. I started moving deeper into the woods, thinking maybe he wandered off for some reason. He could have twisted an ankle, gotten disoriented. Happens more often than people think. That's when I found something that didn't make sense. Bare footprints, adult-sized, leading into the trees. They were strange, though. The toes were long, much longer than they should have been. At first I figured maybe he wasn't wearing shoes, that he lost them somehow. But the more I followed the prints, the more they didn't look human. The spacing was off, like whoever or whatever made them was moving in a way that didn't match any stride I'd seen before. Now, I'm no amateur at reading tracks. This was something else entirely. The trail led down into a gully, thick with underbrush. I had to crouch low and push through, the thorns scraping at my arms. The deeper I went, the heavier the air got, like the forest was pressing in on me. I found Kyle halfway down the ridge, or what was left of him. He was sitting up against a tree, his back propped awkwardly, legs splayed out like he'd been dropped there. No blood, no obvious injuries at first glance, just a vacant stare. But then I saw his throat. It wasn't cut, it wasn't torn. It was like something had gnawed on it, leaving this mess of torn flesh that I couldn't make sense of. No animal I've ever seen does that. And there was this stench. Not the kind you get from a body left out in the elements. This was foul, like something rotting from the inside out. I stood there, staring, trying to figure out what could have done this when I heard a sound behind me. A shuffle, like something dragging through the underbrush. I turned quick. Nothing. Just the same damn trees staring back at me. I wasn't armed that day. It was one of those decisions you regret in hindsight. Budget cuts or something stupid meant the department didn't issue sidearms to every searcher. We weren't supposed to need them. Most of the time I didn't. But right then, I really wished I had one. I crouched next to Henderson, keeping my eyes on the trees. The air felt heavy. I called for him again, even though it was obvious he wouldn't answer. As I radioed in, I heard the crack of a branch, much closer this time. Not the kind of snap you hear from a deer or a bear. It was deliberate, slow, like something was watching me, testing the space between us. I didn't stick around to find out what. I made my way back up the ridge, keeping my head on a swivel. But the forest? It was too damn quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, matching my every step. Every once in a while, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, just enough to make my heart race, but never enough to fully see. By the time I got back to my truck, it was nearly dusk, and the feeling that had been gnawing at the back of my mind had grown into full-blown paranoia. Something was out there, and it had killed Henderson. Maybe it was following me. Maybe it was just waiting. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mountain lion or some rabid animal, but nothing about what I saw fit into any category I could name. I threw my pack in the truck bed ready to leave, but the engine didn't start. Battery was dead. Perfect. I swore, climbed out, and popped the hood. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural breath, like something exhaling just behind me. I froze. I'm not too proud to admit that in that moment, I wasn't thinking like a professional. I was thinking like a guy who really didn't want to die in the middle of nowhere. I slowly turned, expecting to see some kind of animal. But what I saw wasn't an animal. It wasn't human either. It was crouched low, maybe 30 feet away, half hidden behind a tree. Its limbs were too long, too thin, like it had been stretched out. The thing moved forward, almost spider-like, with these sharp, jerky movements. Its head was tilted sideways, and the skin, if you could even call it that, was tight, almost leathery. It reminded me of a lizard in the worst way possible. For a second, we just stared at each other. I don't know if it was sizing me up or what, but I felt like prey. My mind raced. What the hell was it? And then it started to move again, faster this time, limbs twitching as it crept closer. I bolted. There was no hesitation. Survival instinct kicked in, and I sprinted down the road, hoping to put enough distance between us. I didn't look back, not until I heard it. This awful screech, not a growl or roar, but this sharp, high-pitched scream that sent a shockwave through my body. I made it to an old ranger outpost, busted the door open and slammed it behind me. The thing crashed into the door a second later, scratching, clawing at the wood. It wasn't giving up. I grabbed a nearby chair, wedging it under the knob, hoping it would hold. Minutes passed. It kept slamming into the door, relentless. I backed up, scanning the room for anything I could use as a weapon. Nothing but an old rusted shovel in the corner. And then it stopped. Silence. I stayed there, breathing heavy, waiting for something, anything to happen. But it didn't. The thing just stopped, like it lost interest. Or maybe it was waiting for me to make a mistake. I never found out. I waited until dawn, shaking, exhausted, before I made my move back to the truck. Whatever it was had disappeared, but Henderson's body, it hadn't gone anywhere. I made the call to base, finally getting through once I hit a clear spot on the road. The sheriff's office came out, picked up Kyle's body. They asked questions, but I couldn't answer any of them. Weeks later, they said it was some kind of animal attack, but they didn't have an explanation for the lack of blood, for the way his body was found. Whatever it was, it's still out there. Maybe it's still watching, still waiting for someone else to take that wrong turn. I had been working search and rescue for about 9 years when the incident took place. It was 1997, somewhere in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, a place where the forest feels ancient and timeless. We got a call about a missing family, 2 parents, 1 kid. They'd gone off the trail and hadn't checked in for a few days. Standard procedure, really. It wasn't uncommon for people to overestimate their ability to handle the wilderness. And most times you found them wandering, dehydrated, but alive. My name's Dylan Curtis. I'm not one of those gung-ho adrenaline junkies, even though the job might seem like that. No, I'm more the type who enjoys a quiet night, sipping whiskey with my dog, watching reruns of shows no one under 30's ever heard of. I got into search and rescue because, well, it seemed like something that needed doing. Plus, it paid well enough to cover the bills. I wasn't looking to be a hero. I was just trying to get by. Anyway, this call was like any other. I was partnered with Katie, another ranger who had been with the service even longer than me. She had this no-nonsense attitude that made it clear she didn't put up with the romanticized nonsense people attach to the wilderness. You know, all that find yourself in the wild crap. Katie once told me the only thing the wilderness would help you find is your own limits, and sometimes it wasn't pretty. I respected that about her. The family had gone off-grid somewhere near Bishop Creek, where the forest thickens and cell signal dies completely. There was no GPS ping from their phones, nothing to help us other than a vague idea of where they might have been headed. We hiked for hours, just the 2 of us, combing the area, calling out their names, hoping to hear something. Katie cracked a joke about how most people thought you could yell at the forest and expect it to give answers. If the trees could talk, they'd probably tell you to shut up. But after about half a day, things started to get weird. And not just the usual unsettling vibe that comes with being too far from civilization. There was something off. Like even the birds had stopped chirping and the air was thick like it was holding its breath. I said something to Katie about it and she just shrugged. She wasn't one for superstitions, and neither was I. But that silence, it crawled under my skin like an itch I couldn't scratch. We found the first sign of them around 4 in the afternoon. A small clearing, about 30 yards from the main trail, and there was a fire pit that hadn't been there too long. You could still smell the smoke, faint but present. And then there was the backpack, just sitting there like someone had left it in a rush. Clothes were strewn about like the family had been interrupted in the middle of setting up camp. But no people, no footprints leading away, no sign of a struggle either. Just emptiness. Katie called it in, and we continued to search the perimeter. The longer we searched, the stranger it got. The forest felt like it was pressing in on us, tighter and tighter. It wasn't long before we found a second campsite. Only this one was older, much older. The remnants of a tent, torn and covered in moss, as if it had been abandoned years ago. It made no sense because there hadn't been any reports of missing campers in this area for a long time, at least none matching this. Then we found the first body. It was the kid. He was slumped against a tree, his face pale, and I swear his eyes looked like they'd seen something no kid should ever have to. His body was intact, no obvious wounds, but his hands, they were raw, as if he'd been clawing at the ground. I told Katie, but she was already way ahead of me, scanning the area. "No sign of the parents," she said, her voice flat, professional, like she'd switched into autopilot, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't know what the hell was going on either. We radioed back to base, told them what we'd found, and then Katie decided we should move deeper into the forest. If there was a chance the parents were still alive, we had to act fast. I didn't argue, though every instinct in me was screaming that we should turn back, call in the cavalry, and let the higher-ups handle it. We pushed on, and that's when things really went sideways. I heard something first, something moving through the underbrush. Fast, but not like an animal. It was too deliberate, too human. I signaled to Katie, and we both stopped dead in our tracks, listening. There it was again, this time closer. But when we called out, no one answered. That's when the smell hit us. Rot. Pure, unfiltered rot. Like a carcass that had been left out too long in the sun. But there hadn't been any sign of scavengers, no vultures circling, and in my experience, the forest was quick to clean up its own messes. Not this time. We followed the stench to a small ravine, and at the bottom, that's where we saw them. The parents, or what was left of them. They were lying there, faces twisted, but not in pain. No, it was worse than that. It was like they were grinning. Katie muttered something under her breath, but I didn't catch it. I was too focused on the figure standing just beyond the ravine, watching us. At first, I thought it was a person. A man, maybe, with the way it was standing. But when it stepped forward into the light, I realized how wrong I was. Its body was stretched, like someone had taken a human shape and pulled it too far in every direction. The skin was sickly pale, almost translucent, and it was covered in this wet sheen, like it had just crawled out of something foul. It moved like it didn't know how to use its own limbs properly, like it was testing out a body it hadn't quite grown into. Katie drew her gun, but before she could aim, it bolted, faster than I'd ever seen anything move. I didn't think. I just reacted. We both took off after it, running through the trees like our lives depended on it, which by that point, I guess they did. We chased it for what felt like hours, though it was probably just minutes. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush ahead, but no matter how fast we ran, it was always just out of sight, like it was leading us somewhere. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into the forest. We stopped, gasping for breath, and that's when Katie spotted something in the dirt. There, partially buried, was a pile of bones. Human bones. Some of them looked old, weathered. Others, not so much. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. We both knew what we were looking at. This wasn't just a missing family anymore. This was something else, something bigger, something wrong. We turned to leave, but we weren't alone. That thing, whatever it was, had circled back, and it wasn't alone this time. There were more of them, half a dozen at least, slinking through the trees, their pale bodies catching the last bits of daylight as they closed in. Katie didn't hesitate. She fired off a shot, then another, but it was like they didn't care. They moved closer, slowly, like they knew there was no rush, like they had all the time in the world. I didn't wait for Katie's signal. I ran. I don't remember much of the next few minutes, just the sound of my heartbeat in my ears and the trees blurring past me. I don't know how long I ran, but when I finally stopped, I realized Katie wasn't behind me. I wanted to go back, but I couldn't. I knew she was gone. When I made it back to base, I told them everything, but they didn't believe me. Of course they didn't. They sent out more teams, and when they didn't come back, they closed off the area, blamed it on a landslide or some other natural disaster. I'm not stupid. I know what I saw, even if I don't have the words to explain it. Katie's still out there, or what's left of her. And those things, whatever they are, they're not human. Not anymore. I quit the job a week later. I told them I needed time off, but the truth is, I'm not going back into those woods. I don't care how much they pay me. I never thought it would go down this way. But then again, whoever does? It was 2007, and I had spent the last 5 years as a search and rescue officer with the U.S. Forest Service, based in the Kootenai National Forest. You'd think with a name like that, it would sound peaceful, but this patch of Montana has teeth. And I've seen them. Let me tell you, I didn't sign up for this job to wrestle with nightmares. I took it for the quiet. Funny how that works. My name's Leonard Wakefield. The other guys call me Wakes, like it's funny or something, but I don't mind. What I do mind is how we never seem to get enough credit for what we do out here. City people imagine us rescuing lost hikers, maybe the occasional campfire gone wrong. They don't know that out here, The trees hide more than just bad weather. We had a call that day. Family from Idaho went off the grid, supposed to be a weekend camping trip. One of those places that's marked off limits. But you know the type, always looking for some secret trail, a spot no one else knows about. Makes people feel like explorers or something. Only, you can't call yourself an explorer when there's nothing left to explore. Everything out here already belongs to something, you just don't know what. Dispatch sent me up with Carl Duncan, my partner for 3 years, though we'd known each other since high school. Carl, he's one of those guys who could make a joke out of anything. Flat tire, bear chase, maybe even his own funeral. I liked that about him. Kept things light, even when they weren't. Anyway, we drove out in the old Jeep, you know the kind. Smells like sweat and wet dog, and it rattles like it's going to shake apart any second. By the time we hit the dirt road, I already had that feeling in my gut, like we were walking into a mess. Carl kept talking about his weekend plans, something about a barbecue. I tried to listen, but my mind was elsewhere. The thing about the Kootenai, it's vast. Trees that reach up like they want to tear the sky open, valleys that swallow sound, and streams that run so fast you could scream and no one would hear it. That's the part they don't tell you. The quiet out here isn't peaceful. It's oppressive. Like everything is listening, waiting for you to make a mistake. We found the family's car abandoned near a service road. Nothing weird there. But as we got deeper into the forest, the weird started to kick in. First thing we saw was the tent, untouched, like they just stepped out for a stroll. I've been on enough searches to know that's never a good sign. Then we started seeing tracks. Not human and definitely not bear. Too big, too heavy, and the spacing, like it was dragging something along the ground. I know this forest. I've seen every type of wildlife this place can offer, but I hadn't seen anything like this. Carl nudged me with his elbow. Think they ran into Bigfoot? He grinned, but I didn't laugh. I just looked at the tracks again. There were too many of them going in circles, overlapping like something had been playing with its prey. We followed the trail for another mile or so when we found the first body. At first we didn't realize it was a body, just a pile of what looked like torn up clothes mixed with meat. It was all wrong. Human bodies don't break apart like that. I mean, I've seen people who fell from cliffs, people mauled by cougars, but this was surgical. No animal did this. Carl stopped talking after that. He didn't make a single joke the rest of the way. We found the other two not far from the first, each one worse than the last, ripped, shredded. It wasn't just a kill, it was a display. Like whatever did this wanted to show us what it could do. It wasn't until we were standing over the third one that I realized we hadn't seen any scavengers. No birds, no bugs, not even the usual stink you'd expect from death. The air was stale, like the forest was holding its breath. I wanted to get out of there. Hell, I think we both did. But we're trained for this, right? We radioed it in and they told us to stay put, mark the location, wait for the coroner. Yeah, sure. Just stand here with whatever butchered these people, probably still close enough to see us. Sounded like a great idea. Carl kept checking his watch, tapping it like maybe the time would move faster. He didn't look right, not since we found that first mess. I tried to tell him it was just another day in the woods, but we both knew that was a load of crap. Then the noise came. You ever hear something so out of place it makes your brain trip over itself trying to figure out what it was? That's what it was like. A thudding, not fast but rhythmic, like something heavy was hitting the ground over and over. It didn't sound right. It sounded like someone was dragging an anchor across a gravel pit. Carl looked at me, eyes wide. He mouthed the word, "What?" I didn't have an answer. We stood still, listening. It was getting closer, but we couldn't tell from where. The trees were too thick, the sound was bouncing off everything. My hand went to my side, feeling for the radio, but I didn't grab it. What was I going to say? That we heard a weird noise? They'd tell us to stay put again. The sound stopped. The silence after that was worse. Like someone flipped a switch and turned the world off. No wind, no birds, nothing. Carl gestured for me to move. We weren't going to wait anymore. He started walking back toward the Jeep, and I followed. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. We were both thinking the same thing. Whatever made that noise was close. And if it found us, well, we'd be the next display. We made it maybe 100 yards when Carl went down. One second he was walking, the next he was on the ground, face first in the dirt. I rushed to him, thinking he tripped, but when I rolled him over, I saw the blood. It was coming from his neck, fast. Too fast. And there, sticking out from the back of his neck, was a chunk of bone. Not his, something else's. I froze. My hands were on him, but I didn't know what to do. There was no fixing this. He tried to say something, but all that came out was a wet gurgle. And then he was gone. I didn't even have time to process it when I heard the sound again. The thudding. Only now it wasn't rhythmic. It was fast and it was coming right for me. I ran. I don't remember how far or how long. All I know is I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed behind a fallen tree. I couldn't see it, whatever it was, but I could feel it. It was out there, circling, waiting for me to make a mistake. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening. The thudding came and went, getting close, then farther away. I held my breath every time it neared. My body was shaking, my hands caked in Carl's blood, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Then, out of nowhere, the sound stopped. Just like that. I waited, still frozen, until I was sure it was gone. When I finally stood up, I didn't go back for Carl. I couldn't. I made my way back to the Jeep and radioed it in. I didn't tell them what happened, not the whole story. I just said Carl was down, and I was coming in. I wasn't sticking around to explain. By the time they sent another team out, there wasn't much left of Carl, and no one believed me about the noise. They chalked it up to a bear attack. Yeah, right. That wasn't a bear. I quit a week later. Never set foot in those woods again. I don't know what it was, but I can tell you this. If you're ever out in the Kootenai, and you hear something heavy thudding in the distance, don't wait around to find out. Run. Trust me. You don't want to end up like Carl.